into the topic for tonight. We are in the midst of the counting of the Omer. Again, I put a diagram in the chat, and we're at a time which is really extraordinary in Jewish practice. I don't think anything like it in any other practice. Very basics. It says in the Bible that we should count the 49 days from the second day of Passover to Shavuot. Passover being the holiday of liberation, Shavuot the holiday of revelation. And the tradition has always seen these 49 days in a kind of a mysterious way, but there's no actually canonical definition of what happens during these 49 days. The Talmud says that when we were in Egypt, we went down to the 49th level of impurity, and therefore we had 49 days of work, of purification, before we were, as it were, in a pure enough state to receive revelation. But the rabbis of the Talmud didn't tell us how we do that. Just said there were 49 days. Why? Because there's 49 days between Passover and Shavuot. A real breakthrough was made when Kabbalah came into being in the late 1100s, early 1200s, especially with the Zohar, which was written in the 1200s. And the Kabbalah says, very briefly, that the 7 lower sfirot, and you can see that in the diagram, we count 1 sfirah each week. And again, there's no real guide to how one does it. So if we just go from our major sources, it's a practice without the meaning defined. It more or less says, here's a practice, make of it what you will. Now, this changed as time went on, when people notice, well, if there's 7 lower emanations and there are 7 days of the week, each day of the week you combine the two. So, for example, the first day would be the Chesed of Chesed, the second day would be the Gevura of Chesed, the third day would be the Tiferet Emet of Chesed, however you're using it, and that you're doing some kind of a mental combination that ideally produces some kind of a spiritual insight. I did it for many years. I found it was useful, but that's really mostly for mastering the names and meanings of the sfirot. After you do that for a few years, it becomes a bit routinized. And therefore, I said to everybody who's interested in this, certainly do that. Certainly memorize the 7 sfirot, look up the meanings of them. My diagram might help a little bit. Go through each day of the week with a meditation, and you can even do the permutations of each one of the 7 days is a permutation of the 7 sfirot. That's a good way to do it. However, after a couple of years, for me, it tired out. So I went to for me, a metaphor, a deeply symbolic metaphor that produced transformation. Remember, we go from what is the ritual, how did it come about, what's the symbolic dimension, and what's the transformative dimension. So for me, it went something like this. If we start with the holiday of Shavuot, which from a traditional perspective means the revelation by God at Mount Sinai of something called Torah. In Exodus chapter 20, it seems to be just the 10 Commandments. The tradition has never been happy with that. They say the entire Torah was revealed at Mount Sinai on Shavuot, which is almost preposterous because nothing in the text says that. It's kind of a heroic rabbinic statement, but there's something deep there that the logos, the Torah, the teaching of the mind of God, came into the Jewish people, by extension humanity, at a certain time, or that it's always been shining into humanity, and that's just the day that we commemorate an ongoing cosmic event. When you have Hasidic Judaism come into being, it goes from revelation, the Hitgalut, something of the divine essence being revealed, to the divine essence being revealed into each person. And therefore, each person has their own experience of the revelation. Now, I want us to think what that might be, why that might be. Well, every person is utterly different. I mean, we are archetypally very similar. In all of my years of working with people, there's about 10 basic archetypes of people and basic archetypes of relationship. But even in those archetypes, there's vast differences between people for all kinds of reasons that I don't have to go into. And therefore, the revelation that awaits you is different from the revelation that awaits another person. Another way of saying this that I've taught before is that if we see it as the revelation of the mitzvot, of the commandments, there's a commandment waiting for you that's not waiting for somebody else. After all this work, you realize there is something singular that you must do, a positive commandment, or must stop doing a negative commandment. Do this, don't do that, and it's waiting for you. So how do you find it? How do you find the revelation that is waiting for you that you need to know? And it's an interesting idea as we move toward that Mount Sinai moment. Imagine that there is a secret resting in darkness. We're kind of trudging through the darkness. As we trudge through the darkness, light is created. And there's a moment when we need to, as it were, climb our own Mount Sinai. And if we've done our work, the secret that is resting in the dark becomes light, the light of the Torah, as it were, and it enters into us, and we can have this transformative moment. And I believe this to be true. Why do I believe it to be true? Because I believe in every aspect of the spiritual work and the counseling that I do, is that people don't know why they do things. People don't know that they can stop doing things. If people knew why they do things and that they could stop and there's something better to do, everything would be great. There wouldn't be marriages in trouble. There wouldn't be people suffering. People wouldn't have existential dread. So try to imagine every person who's not suffering from something medical, let's say, depression, anxiety, guilt, shame, victimhood status, etc. Relationship suffering between spouses, parents and children, children and parents, at the workplace. There is a wise way through it. There's a wise way to deal with even irreducible conflict. There's a wise way to deal with it. Most conflict is not irreducible. Why do people have this conflict between each other when it doesn't need to be there? Because they don't know something. How do I know that? Sometimes when I share with someone what they ought to do, which means I deliver to them a new mitzvah, things clear up quickly. I want to give you just a brief example as Meirav and I are working through the entire Wisdom Work syllabus, and it's really been refreshing for us to streamline everything and see it both from, its elegant sparseness and then in the rich details. A person was sharing with me that his spouse was critical of him in front of other people. And this person would get defensive, and sometimes in front of other people get defensive, or at home get defensive. Oftentimes using the rhetorical why, the why of complaint. Why do you do this? And of course, the words out of the mouth of I'll say the transgressing spouse would never be satisfying. Why do you criticize me? Because you deserve criticism. You do wrong things. Well, we know what happens after that. And stuck in this loop for 10 years. And so I offered the person a technique he had not known. A technique meaning a way to manage a verbal transaction to get to the truth of the issue. Okay, I said this. Simply, I say to your spouse, did this indeed happen? Did you indeed say to me? And repeat the cut down, put down, dismissive phrase. And person says, yeah, well, you always do it. And person says, no, I'm not asking why you said it. I just want to verify that you did say it. And the person says, yes, I did say that. And may even go back into justifying. Person says, you don't have to justify it. I just want to make sure that you and I experience reality the same way. There's an objective truth. So we are both agreeing that you said something dismissive, a minor cut down or put down in front of other people. Or says yes. Okay, thank you. Walk away. He said, but why walk away? I mean, don't I need to say something? I said, you've already said half of what you need to say. Because when you push with your counter critique, meaning you wronged me, and now I will criticize you, hardly anything good comes from that. You've left a person alone with their thought that they criticized someone in their family, typically a spouse, in public, which, according to Jewish norms, is absolutely forbidden. You never diminish other people in public. You want to give someone a constructive thought, you do it in private. You never diminish another person in public. This is one of the worst forms of Lashon Hara. It's an absolute Jewish norms. So even if people don't know that that's an absolute Jewish norm, I think people understand that it is ethically improper to diminish another person in public. But many people just don't know they do it, because when they're confronted with it, what I'll say, a thought of untruth from the world of lies, Olam Shikar, comes in and says, well, I'm justified. Meaning, I can do unethical things because I have my reasons. That's something to sit with. Every person who says something mean to another person and knows they say it and admit to saying it, what they say is, I had my reasons. Well, let's just sit with that truth. I can violate ethical standards as long as I have my reasons. There's no ethical system in the world that thinks that that is actually a proper guide for living. Remember the Kantian idea, whatever guide for living you have, whatever maxim you live by, imagine that is the universal maxim for all humankind, that all humankind ought to act by the maxim, I can be mean to people in public as long as I have a reason. Well, that fails on every level. Now, with a morally healthy person, you don't need to tell them that. You just have them admit that they said it and then walk away and let truth do its work. He said, okay, I hope my spouse listens to this. And he says, what's part two? I said, first do part one for a while. Here's part two. Person can say, we both agree that you say dismissive things in public, correct? Yes. And from prior conversation, I understand the reason you say it is I deserve it. That you feel that you need to point out to me the things that I do that you think are deficient. So you need to point out my deficiencies. Person says, yes, that's my job, is to point out your deficiencies. So then here's the question. And again, you're not criticizing. You're not telling a person what to do. You're not telling a person how to be. You're just asking, what is your motivation or goal in doing this in public? And I'm not saying you shouldn't. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just asking, what is your motivation or goal in doing this in public? So stop talking. Now, from all the counseling that I've done with a morally healthy person, the offending party will simply not have an answer, because there is no reason to diminish another human being in public. And I said, typically, when you walk away, they have some thinking to do. Now, if a person who is in a deep state of resentment, the deep state, what I would call the condemnatory mind, a real drive, motivation to accuse, blame, label, cut down, put down, many people get stuck in that frame of mind. And their ongoing justification is, someone's let me down, they're not acting according to my standards, and therefore I need to punish them. The reason people diminish other people in public is to be punitive. They don't know they're punitive. They see themselves as truth talkers. Okay. And so what is their secret? That they're a punitive human being. As are many children when they tease each other. Children says, why are you teasing? The kid would say, because I'm a 7-year-old, I'm punitive. That's why I tease. Now, no 7-year-old knows that. And sometimes it's well for a parent to say, hey, you're a completely normal kid. Kids go through a phase of wanting to be mean and punitive to other people and make them cry. Hopefully you get out of it by the time you're 10. Well, some adults never get out of it. So I want to use this as an example to you that one of the spouses had a mistaken idea on how you affect change in another person, and that was to criticize their behavior, to tell someone to stop doing something. It rarely works when you're dealing with an entrenched person who has their own self-justificatory mechanism. It just doesn't work. For a pragmatic theory of truth, it's not a true way to help another person transform. Okay. Now, the person I was working with did not know this, but within about 10 minutes of my describing, simply establish the report, the so-called police report, the chronology, where both agree, and ask one deep, sincere question. Person had never heard of this practice despite many years of therapy. So there was a gap in knowledge, a gap in a truth. One way to affect change in another person is not to criticize them, tell them what to do, point out their faults, but simply say, did this indeed happen? And depending on the case, for example, can you explain to me your motivation for cutting me down, putting me down in public? Full stop. Now, as far as the other person, over time, the other person did come to their senses. It took a while because many people are entrenched in a frame of mind where they feel they are God's agent on earth to go around and critique other people. My eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord, cutting down the grapes of wrath. And sometimes when a person says, it hurt me, well, you deserve it. What is your motivation to hurt me in public? Why in public? People just don't have an answer to that. And many people said, you're right. That's oftentimes won't say, because I'm a punitive person, I'd like to humiliate you. Some people have actually said it, but that's a good truth to know. Because when you're living with a person who says, yes, I have a drive to humiliate you in public, your problem is a lot bigger than this occasional barb thrown at you with a dinner among friends. That's a mountainous problem to address, but there's a way to address it. If one lives with a human being, was in their own toxic buildup and needs to inflict their toxicity on another person. So I feel that a lot of what I do in my wisdom works teaching and in my counseling is I point out to a person a true way to affect change within themselves and change in a relationship. A true way meaning in a pragmatic William James sense, a reliable way. And the idea that people have there are truths about people that they don't know. They don't know that they do something. They don't know the moral import of this thing. All right, so that's a long windup, and I hope you find it useful of what I mean by the counting of the Omer, is that as we go through the different sfirot and we look at them deeply and we apply them to ourselves, we see things about ourselves that we typically haven't seen. We do it every year because there are parts of ourselves as we grow, as we refine ourselves, maybe the things that we think, do, and feel are not as grossly morally and spiritually destructive when we were younger. It's a more refined, acute sense, but there still is work to do. So let's take the example that I gave you. A person running through the sphere of chesed, of loving kindness, beneficence to another person. And you look in yourself and you have to ask yourself, are you a person of chesed? Are you a person of chesed to the people in your family? Would they say that this person is kind, loving, compassionate, affirming, or not? And sometimes, people are brave enough to say to people, do I come off as a Hasidic person? And oftentimes people are surprised when people say, yeah, we know your intentions are good, but hardly anybody would call you an agent of chesed. Now, what does the person do then? They have to look at themselves and they have to understand that every person should, as it were, form a composite of the best versions of the lower sphirot. And if there's work to do, then you have work to do. That's your work to do. And, I told you the story of the translucent woman some time ago, the woman who at the end of her life realized that she was not a person of grace, love, and chesed. She was a person, by her own admission in her dying days, where she felt it was her job to correct everybody. And she said, that's how I love people. I tell them who they are and what they do. And she came to the realization they don't experience it love. They experience her as a difficult person. And she came to Or HaTorah to confess to me and to tell me of her transformation. That's written up somewhere if you want to take a look for it. Just look for the translucent woman, and my name, it'll appear somewhere. But this was a person at the end of her life. And here's what she said to me. I'm dying young of cancer. She was in her 60s. She said, my dying young was worth this insight, because had I not been dying of cancer, so filled with rage at my impending death, I think I would have died a mean person. I would have never known the truth about myself. She said to me, her early death was worth knowing the truth of herself and living her last days in grace and love. These are basically her words. I'm living my last days in grace and love. And this dying woman had a radiance about her. Now, oftentimes the person who's operating at lower chesed, meaning the way I love people is to correct them, they are connected to, on the side of Gevura Din, which is morality, justice, strength, and etc. They have a very deficient idea of morality as well. So lower chesed and lower din, which is logic, rationality, justice, go together. Their theory of morality, which is if a person transgresses, we have to punish them, ideally in public. I'm not saying that's what most people think, but many people unconsciously think it. That's your analysis to do when people talk about what's fair and what's just and what's right. As I've quizzed people who say it's only fair, it's only just, it's only right, they have no idea what these words mean. They actually don't know what the words mean. And this is something of what I call the philosophic dimension of what we teach here is words connect the conscious mind to the unconscious mind. And therefore, it is profoundly important that we use words correctly, meaning according to common usage, and not make up usages that exculpate us. It's a difficult thing. I'm not saying language is stable and language never changes, but in the present time, if a person says, I believe I'm a fair person, then you say, well, what do you mean by a fair person? And sometimes what comes out is, well, a punitive person. They're not being fair, so I'll be extra unfair. And nobody defines fairness in that way. So when we move over in justice, fairness, logic, and so forth, most people don't know what these words mean because they've never thought about it. Not because they can't know, they just never thought about it. Nor do they apply them in their lives. It's a startling thing when people think, I don't think logically. I don't think fairly. I don't think in ways that produce justice, as they discover what justice is. So for me, a big part of the counting of the Omer is going into not just emotional exercises on chesed, love, gevura din, rationality, but even a philosophic quest for truth. A philosophic quest for truth. What is love? Ought we be loving people? How does one become a loving people? What does love look like in all its variations? Am I a person of justice? Do I live a life of righteousness? Do I think well? Meaning, am I logical? We sometimes don't ask these questions until we force ourselves to ask them. And again, according to my further idea, we don't know that we are stumbling around in a world of darkness. Now, the only way we do know, and I'm borrowing a line from Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto, he says, we live in a world of darkness. How do you know? A person walking through a dark room packed with furniture. You know because you bump into things. You hurt. If you're particularly, the bull in the china shop, you hurt the room. So when people say, I don't think I'm living right, why? Because I keep getting hurt and I keep hurting other people. Well, that's evidence there's no light on in the room. You don't know how this room of interpersonal relationships is built. You keep bumping into people, they keep bumping into you. Now, some bumping into is inevitable in human life. I call it bumper car theory. Yeah, we are going to bump into each other and scrape each other, but there's what I call the necessary and irreducible bumping that's built into the human condition, and the non-necessary and the reducible. How do you get there? Again, I'm borrowing this from Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto in his book, Mesilat Yesharim, The Path of the Wise. He says we have to look at our derachim and hergelim. We have to look at our hergelim, our habits, our derachim, our pathways, mostly mental, and ask ourselves, are these ways and paths bringing light into that darkened room, which was Shanti, sometimes when you say, I don't know why I chose this tonight, because that's what my talk is going to be about tonight, is drawing down the light from the darkened upper realms and bringing light to our lives, and using the image from Moshe Chaim Luzzatto on bringing darkness to darkness to the bringing light to the metaphoric darkened room. So that's a meditation on chesed, to really look at it philosophically, or courageously, unrelentingly. And then you go to din. I prefer the word din, which in Mishnaic Hebrew means justice. It means righteousness. It could even mean rational. In some Kabbalistic systems, the second lower of the lower seventh throat, it is called din. So I've borrowed that from another system. It's usually called gevura. I think din. It's also boundary setting. So, for example, sometimes when people get really hurt all the times, it turns out they plead with other people. I call it, using my bad Jedi system, justify, explain, entreat. Please don't do that, which doesn't work with a person who's ensconced in a negative state. The entreaties won't mean anything to them. They're stuck. So how do you get a person out of being in an entrenched toxic state? Well, not by begging. That doesn't work. So what I've discovered is when people work on setting kind, clear, firm, and even ruthless boundaries, the transgressor does not find a reward or a payoff, because someone sets up a kind, clear, firm wall of justice that people just can't get through. Now, there are ways to form those walls, but again, what do I find? People don't know how to do it, which means there's a truth that they don't know, a pragmatic truth on how to accomplish something that they've never heard of, that they don't know how to do. You might say a wisdom practice as yet unrevealed, a wisdom practice that has not had yet the light come to it. And that might be the light waiting for you at Mount Sinai. If you are poor at setting kind, clear, firm, and even ruthless, righteous boundaries, this might be your quest from Pesach to Shavuot. Now we come to the week ending. So that week is ending on today and tomorrow. We start a new week on Sunday night, and that's the week of the third Sphira, which is my favorite to study. In some Sephirotic systems, it's known as Emet, truth, and other systems of the Sphirot, it is called Tiferet, or beauty. Now, these are two of the most wonderful philosophic themes to study. You know, as I was reviewing theories of truth this week, I think to myself, why don't I study theories of truth more? It's just so beautiful and elegant to take a word like truth and realize there are, at least six different theories of truth, and to look at each of them, and then go into the study of aesthetics. And there have been books and books written on aesthetics. It's a really productive area of human thought. And then, of course, you bring it to yourself. I mean, from a spiritual perspective. And, and I try to unpack what these words meant sometimes, sometime in the late fall, early winter. What does it mean to find the true self? What does it mean to be a true person? What does it mean to have a beautiful mind? What does it mean to be a beautiful person? Now, these sentences are not easy to unpack, but they're meaningful in the English language. To say I met someone today, wow, what a beautiful person, what a beautiful neshama. That communicates meaning in the English language. It would be well to unpack that. And if you would like that to be said about you. So these words, but they don't have a stable singular meaning, because if you look them up, there's volumes written on each word, but you might say they hold underneath them, as it were, a worlds of meaning. And of course, they move into each other. It's been quoted before here: truth is beauty and beauty is truth. How is that so? So I call this, from a Jungian perspective, a truth and beauty hold the coincidence of opposites. Now, what are the opposites? Chesed on one hand, loving kindness on one hand. Din on the other hand are somewhat oppositional, but these two sphirot, they merge into the third sphira, which can be called truth or beauty. So that holds actually the coincidence of beauty, of chesed, love on one hand, din, justice on the other hand, into the sphera of truth and beauty. Maybe those of you who haven't heard me enough talk about this, is this indeed the source of my main garments of God? Love, justice, truth, and beauty? Yes, it absolutely is. I've shared that when I was a young graduate student in the 1980s, I had two once a month congregations, one in Thousand Oaks and one in Irvine. And when I got in my car to drive out there, I would set for myself thought experiments. And one thought experiment was, what are the major things that drive human beings to meaningful lives? And I did a lot of parsing out, and I finally came with love, justice, truth, and beauty as the garments of God, the garments that are unified in the notion of the good, and then beyond that, the holy and the divine. But operationally, love, justice, truth, and beauty. And then I looked at the Kabbalah, and I looked at the first three sphirot, chesed, din, or gevura din, tiferet emet, love, justice, truth, and beauty. I was electrified, and I've been electrified ever since. Oh, you might find this interesting to know. So I get an email from a young man who's considering rabbinical school, and his mother is a rabbi, and his father is a very learned Jew. And he said to me, I've been brought up on love, justice, truth, and beauty that my parents said they learned it from you back in the 1980s. And I thought, wow, really? There's somebody, some kid in some other state who's brought up on these things that I taught his parents when they were rabbinical students. He says, yes, I just, you've shaped my parents' life and how they think, and my mother's being a rabbi, and I want to be a rabbi, and I want to know where, in what rabbinical school is this taught? I said, I didn't learn it in rabbinical school, but I'm happy to mentor you on your path. So that was such a pleasurable thing this week, to think that the teachings that I gave made that much a difference in a lovely couple's life, that their son consciously and vividly says, I was brought up on these four principles, and my parents attribute this teaching to you. Now, love, justice, truth, and beauty are certainly found in the Kabbalah, but I think the idea of extensively investigating them spiritually and philosophically may be a thing that I, and perhaps others, have contributed to the study of the Sphirot. So when we go into truth, there are so many versions of truth, but here's the one most meaningful to me that I talked about in the fall, and that's what it means to be a true human being. So a true human being is not a state that you arrive at. A true human being is not arriving at your inner truth as if it is something stable. It is a process of becoming. A process of becoming where you want to know the truth about yourself. Now, this is difficult because when you look at the history of psychology and psychotherapy, when you went to a Freudian, well, they would tell you the truth about yourself. And you'd go to a Jungian, you'd find a different truth about yourself. And you went to Gordon Allport, you'd find a different truth about yourself. I have a book that I got, again, I think back in the 1980s, called 7 Schools of Psychology. Each one would tell you a different truth about yourself. So it is the method that would provide the truth. And there's actually a book called Truth and Method. The idea that when you're looking for truth, you pick the method, and the method will front load the truth. Now, it's a difficult thing, because a person says, well, if every school of psychology is preset with its own definition of truth, and and if in the unlikely event it is the only version of truth, which I don't believe, why are the other 6 bad? Because every one of the other 6 seems convincing. This is from the book, the 7 Psychological Schools, something like that. So when you want to know the truth of yourself, you certainly have to look at the different psychological schools. It doesn't take a lot to know them. An intelligent person can probably summarize them in a few paragraphs of thought. And then, you go to a guide that isn't doctrinal, isn't dogmatic. I call it an existentialist person. The person says, I counsel based on your existence as a human being as it is presented to me. I don't arrive with a method, the method is rooted in what you are after. I call this, I don't have another word for it. Most people call it existentialist counseling or existentialist therapy, which is there's no method except what is called forth from the search of the seeking person. So depending on what you're after, that's why sometimes when people ask me for counseling, I said, I mentioned this to you. What are you after? What's the pain? What's the resistance? And what are you willing to do about it? I don't know if I say that every time, but something like that. What are you after? Where's the pain? Where's the resistance? And what are you willing to do about it? How much of you are you willing to give? The only answer, by the way, is whatever it takes. I'll give it all of me. To be very, very sincere where the pain is, and to understand your resistance and make sure that what you're after actually makes sense on some moral and spiritual level. It's a complex thing, and maybe after we get through the Counting of the Omer, I'll do a full class either on Friday nights or in a wisdom work class on that. So the search for truth is not as if you're looking for something, but it's the search for true being. The search for being a person of truth. And of course, there are truthful revelations along the way, meaning discoveries of who you are, what you're after, where the pain is, what the resistance is, and maybe even your lack of will to do it. Now, what are you willing to do? Well, I will to go all the way. Now, it's the same with beauty. There are many different theories of beauty. One of my favorite is something like different components held in tense harmony. If it's too harmonious, it's just a still of fruit and vegetables on the table. Not to mean those can't be great art, but you have to be a great artist to create the tension. Oh, I should say as a side, when I was right out of the military and I took a class called Arts and Modern Man at Long Beach City College, two really wonderful guys were leading we community college students into the world of arts, and we had to go to museums and write papers. And one time he brought into the class and put a painting in front of the class of there must be a word for it, the fruit bowl setting. But the person who painted it, who was there, who sat there in the class, it wasn't the best technique, but it was alive. It was electric. The truth in the painting was not that it looked like an apple, but this is what I wrote in my paper. The apple was suffering, that it was stuck in the form of the apple. The appleness could not stand being stuck in the apple form, and the person communicated this in the painting. So I stared and stared and stared at the painting, and I could feel the existentialist dread of the parts of the painting of being stuck in, spirit stuck in the life of form. So I wrote out my paper and thought to myself, oh my God, what a brilliant artist. And then of course we each ran by our meanings to the artist. He says, I don't know, I just painted it. I don't know anything about it. Wow, it was such an amazing moment because I was sure that I had pierced through the aesthetic depths of the mind of the painter. He says, look, I just paint. I don't know what I'm doing. And the two teachers looked around the room with palpable delight that we all understood is the truth of the painting that it leads us to an inner truth. Well, yeah, that was about me. I live with this existential tension. My spirit can't stand being stuck in the form of the human life. That's a very kind of pure existentialist experience, maybe especially of young people. So I guess I'm young. But so when you think of beauty as something, whatever the intention of the, let's say, artist is, and there's a big discussion about intention and beauty. Does the meaning of an art form, is it exhausted by the intention of the artist? So in all the books on meaning, and especially aesthetics that I've read, none agrees that the meaning of a piece of art or the meaning of a text is exhausted by the intention. So intentionality is a discredited theory of interpretation. Things don't mean something because of the intentions of the artist, although that counts. So then the question is, this is called reception theory. Does the meaning of something is it exhausted by how it is received among a community of receivers? Let's say the public that goes to the museum. Is the meaning contained by, if one were to do a survey of those who attended, how did you experience that painting? We write it up, and that's called the constructivist theory. The meaning of it is by the consensus of people who experience it. Well, that seems to be deficient. Well, is the meaning of the truth some kind of combination of the intention of the artist or the producer and the experience of the people? That seems just kind of dry and formulaic. Then you bring in more mystical ideas. And I'm a mystic, I'm a metaphysician. If there's something that we call art, does it bring down something of the form of art in the mind of God? Does it anchor in this reality? And therefore, it's operating in the mind and spirit of the creator, and it's operating in the mind and spirit of the receivers, and between the divine, the creator, the receiver, some kind of deep, mysterious, transformative moment is created by that intersection of all these intentionalities coming to bear. I'm closer to that idea. I believe that truth and beauty are rooted in the mind of the divine. And one reason we are so overwhelmed when we have these deep moments of truth and beauty is that we have it's become something of a moment of divine revelation. So to bring this all together tonight, we finished the week of Chesed. We are finishing on tomorrow night, Saturday night, the last counting for the week of Gevurah Din. We are entering into the week of Tiferet Emet. And for me, as I contemplate this idea, it's a profoundly deep, searching practice filled with spiritual quest, moral refinement, philosophic quest, moral refinement, and spiritual depth. So I pray that for all of you, it has some of this as well.